We won, they lost. Men used ruthless compliance to defeat their adversaries. The most shocking truth emerging right now is that men have quietly won the long game by simply walking away, leaving women to face the full weight of the systems they once demanded. And by 2030, nearly half of women aged 25 to 44 in the United States will be single and childless, a projection that signals not empowerment, but a profound demographic and social shift where men have chosen solitude over entanglement. Imagine a world where the very tools created to protect and elevate one group are turned back on that group through precise, unrelenting adherence to their own rules, stripping away advantages once taken for granted. And consider how this dynamic is unfolding, not just in isolated pockets, but across entire societies, economies, and cultures, building toward consequences that will reshape everything from family structures to national futures. So stay with me because what starts as a story of withdrawal ends with a clear picture of why men are no longer turning back and how this reversal is accelerating faster than most realize. Men have begun to phase women out of their daily lives in ways that are deliberate, systematic, and increasingly irreversible. A process rooted in direct responses to decades of shifting expectations around gender roles, interactions, and responsibilities. What began as demands for equality evolved into frameworks that placed men under constant scrutiny, where everyday actions could be interpreted as offenses, leading to professional risks, legal threats, or social ostracism. Rather than fight these frameworks head on in endless debates, men adapted by complying with them to the letter, often in ways that expose their original imbalances. This approach, a form of ruthless adherence to stated principles, has effectively neutralized many of the privileges that once flowed one way, creating parallel realities where men build their own spaces, economies, and sources of fulfillment entirely separate from female participation. In places like South Korea, this pattern has become starkly visible through policies pushed forward in the name of protection that ended up limiting natural human courtship to rigid boundaries. When concerns arose about persistent unwanted advances, rules were established limiting how many times a man could express romantic interest to the same woman before it crossed into harassment territory, with serious consequences attached. Men accepted this limit without resistance, applying it universally and immediately, which removed the possibility of prolonged pursuit or playful persistence that some might have viewed as part of building connection. The result was a sharp drop in approaches overall, as no reasonable person would risk legal jeopardy over repeated attempts that could be documented and escalated. What was intended as a safeguard against genuine harm became a barrier to any organic romantic development, and men simply stopped initiating altogether rather than navigate the minefield. This same principle of agreement, followed by strict application, extended into workplaces where accusations of gatekeeping opportunities led to open declarations that hiring and promotion would favor men to maintain competitive edges, eliminating informal mentorship or support networks that once helped women advance. In media and entertainment, complaints about problematic humor or dialogue prompted agreements to remove all such content across the board in pursuit of true equity, leaving production sanitized and less engaging, particularly for audiences that had already begun drifting away. These responses were not acts of sabotage, but precise mirrors held up to the demands, showing what happens when rules are enforced without exception or favoritism. The broader outcome is a global withdrawal where men prioritize their own peace, financial stability, and personal growth over involvement in systems that feel stacked against them. Statistics paint a clear picture of this shift, with projections indicating that by the end of the decade, a significant portion of women in prime years will remain unattached and without children, not necessarily by choice alone, but because the pool of willing partners has diminished dramatically. In many Western societies, Young men are statistically more likely to be single, while young women appear less so only because a small subset of highly sought after men cycle through multiple connections simultaneously, concentrating attention and leaving the majority of interactions superficial or non existent. Online spaces have accelerated this separation, with communities dedicated exclusively to male perspectives flourishing, covering everything from financial independence to analysis of interpersonal dynamics through logical frameworks. Creators who once focused narrowly on topics like real estate or gaming now integrate discussions of gender realities, providing men with resources tailored to their experiences without external interference. This creates self sustaining ecosystems where men find validation, education, and entertainment among themselves, reducing the need for mixed gender interactions that carry perceived risks. Economic dimensions reveal another layer of this withdrawal. Men continue to shoulder a disproportionate share of tax contributions while scaling back hours worked and consumer spending, starving systems that rely on high revenue for expansive programs. Women, historically responsible for the majority of discretionary purchases, face tightening budgets as traditional providers step back, and industries dependent on male spending, such as dining out or nightlife, suffer declines. Restaurants see fewer couples, with men opting out of funding dates entirely, leading to reduced foot traffic and closures in upscale segments. Entertainment venues that once thrived on mixed crowds now cater to predominantly female audiences who lack the financial means or interest from men to sustain them. Physical spaces reflect this too, as men abandon co ed environments in favor of private or restricted alternatives. Gyms, once shared territories, lose male membership when complaints about behavior lead to stricter oversight or discomfort, prompting men to train at home or in exclusive settings. This pivot preserves health and discipline without external drama, while the original venues struggle to maintain viability. Looking ahead, emerging technologies amplify these trends further. Artificial intelligence stands ready to transform content creation and personal companionship, offering alternatives that eliminate human variables altogether. Young men increasingly form bonds with digital interfaces that provide consistent interaction without judgment or demands. The pattern expected to intensify as capabilities advance. In professional realms, men adapt by entering decentralized fields like cryptocurrency or skill based bartering, networks that exclude or disadvantage those outside trusted circles. These developments stem from a fundamental recognition that mutual benefit has eroded, replaced by adversarial positioning. Men, having absorbed criticism for decades, now choose disengagement as the most effective strategy, finding greater happiness and savings in independence. Happiness metrics for single men rise even amid economic pressures as minimalism and self reliance yield tangible rewards. Women, meanwhile, confront the reality that state support cannot fully replace individual provision, especially as fiscal strains mount from reduced contributions. This is not a fleeting reaction, but a sustained reorientation where men build lives that no longer require female involvement for fulfillment or survival. Overseas destinations offer appealing contrasts with lower cost and cultural dynamics that prioritize compatibility and respect, allowing men to thrive while maintaining distance from domestic tensions. The cumulative effect is a quiet reshaping of society, one interaction at a time, where withdrawal becomes the default path to peace. And yet, this story continues to unfold in layers, with more examples from workplaces to public transport illustrating how compliance reveals underlying imbalances. On public transit, early complaints about space usage prompted calls for stricter policies on occupancy, which men embraced by standing rather than sitting or reporting violations when others claimed excessive room, turning the rule into a universal standard that affected everyone equally. Such instances highlight the power of literal adherence, where demands for fairness lead to environments where no one enjoys special consideration. The pattern repeats across cultures with variations in intensity but consistent outcomes. In East Asian contexts, economic competition and policy responses have intensified withdrawal, contributing to record low birth rates, not primarily through female refusal, but through male disengagement from family formation. Similar dynamics emerge elsewhere as men prioritize personal sovereignty over traditional roles. This narrative builds toward understanding the full scope of these changes from interpersonal to macroeconomic levels, showing how individual choices aggregate into societal transformation. Men have not vanished, but relocated their energy to self contained systems, leaving gaps that expose dependencies once hidden. The consequences ripple outward, affecting industries, demographics, and cultural norms in ways that demand attention. Continuing from where we left off, the pattern of withdrawal extends deeply into everyday public interactions, where men apply the same principle of literal compliance to rules once championed as protections, but now revealing their double edged nature. Take the long-standing discussions around personal space on crowded public transportation systems in major cities worldwide. For years, women highlighted issues like men taking up excessive room on buses or trains, coining terms to describe the behavior and pushing for stricter enforcement of seating policies or anti-encroachment measures. Men, instead of arguing against the premise, fully embraced the call for equity in space usage. They began standing during commutes, even when seats were available, or they meticulously documented instances where others, including women placing bags or belongings across multiple seats, violated the same standards. Quiet reports to transit authorities followed, not out of spite, but as consistent application of the advocated rules. The outcome shifted the dynamic. What was once a pointed critique became a neutral, universally enforced norm that inconvenienced everyone equally, removing any implicit allowances and making shared spaces less comfortable for all. This small but consistent action reinforced the broader message that special considerations erode when applied without exception. In professional environments, the story repeats with even greater consequences for long term structures. When accusations surfaced that men were hindering women's career advancement through informal networks or biased decision making, men responded by openly aligning with the push for transparency and merit based selection. They declared intentions to prioritize competence without regard to gender, which in practice meant eliminating mentorship programs that had informally favored one side or the other. Promotions became strictly documented processes, competitions intensified without softening influences, and collaborative opportunities narrowed to formal channels only. Women who once benefited from guidance found those pathways closed, replaced by direct rivalry in high stakes settings. The shift exposed how much of past progress relied on goodwill rather than pure equity. And as men withdrew that goodwill, the playing field leveled in ways that disadvantaged those accustomed to additional support. Productivity in many sectors suffered not from overt discrimination, but from the loss of cooperative elements that had once smoothed interactions. Entertainment and media provide another clear illustration of this mirroring effect. Content creators and networks faced criticism for allowing dialogue or humor that crossed perceived boundaries, particularly in comedies or dramas depicting interpersonal banter. Calls for removal of such material in the name of respect and equality were met with agreement, but the agreement extended to all parties involved. Edgy jokes targeting either gender were scrubbed, storylines sanitized to avoid any risk of offense, and productions lost the spark that once drew broad audiences. Men, already migrating to alternative content sources, barely noticed the change, while remaining viewers found the output increasingly bland and predictable. What began as a demand for cleaner representations ended up diminishing the appeal of mainstream offerings, pushing more people toward niche or user generated material that bypassed traditional gatekeepers. These examples accumulate into a larger truth about human systems. When rules are enforced rigidly without contextual flexibility, they often expose dependencies that were never openly acknowledged. Men have learned this lesson thoroughly and now apply it across domains, choosing to step back rather than contest every point. The demographic fallout becomes impossible to ignore. Projections from reliable financial analyses, including those by Morgan Stanley, indicate that by 2030, approximately 45% of women in the United States between the ages of 25 and 44 will be single and without children. This figure rises even higher when accounting for single mothers, potentially reaching 60 to 70% in some breakdowns of the population in that age range. These numbers do not stem from a sudden collective decision by women to remain independent, but from a contracting pool of men willing to engage in the traditional pathways of partnership and family building. Men have opted for solitude, focusing energy on personal stability, skill development, and alternative pursuits that carry fewer perceived risks. South Korea stands as one of the most advanced cases of this phenomenon, where cultural and policy responses have created a textbook example of withdrawal accelerating demographic decline. The country's fertility rate has plunged to the lowest levels recorded anywhere, hovering well below replacement and showing no signs of reversal. While much attention falls on the 4B movement among women, which involves refusing marriage, dating, sex, and childbirth as a protest against patriarchal structures, the deeper driver lies in men's comprehensive disengagement. Policies limiting romantic pursuit to a strict count of attempts before qualifying as harassment were instituted in response to concerns over persistent advances. Men adopted the rule precisely, ceasing repeated efforts entirely to avoid any legal exposure. Courtship became direct and minimal, with immediate moves on or swift disengagement upon rejection. This eliminated the gradual building of interest that once characterized many connections, and men simply stopped investing effort in a system stacked with penalties. Workplace dynamics followed suit, with open preferences for male colleagues in competitive fields to maintain advantages, and media content stripped of any controversial elements, leaving women with fewer engaging options in entertainment they once enjoyed. The result in South Korea is not empowerment through refusal, but a mutual standoff where both sides retreat, accelerating population collapse. Kindergartens face empty classrooms, daycare centers close due to insufficient children, and economic forecasts warn of shrinking workforces unable to support aging populations. Men there express a straightforward rationale: avoiding entanglement prevents potential legal or professional jeopardy. Similar sentiments echo in Japan, where withdrawal takes a quieter form, often described as herbivore, men who prioritize personal peace over relational commitments, contributing to decades of stagnant birth rates. In Western contexts, the process unfolds more gradually but follows the same logic, with men citing accumulated experiences of scrutiny, false accusations, or unequal expectations as reasons to abstain from dating, marriage, or even casual friendships with women. Online ecosystems have solidified this separation into something durable and expansive. The Manosphere, a loose but influential network of content creators, forums, and commentators, caters exclusively to male audiences with discussions on finance, self improvement, relationship analysis, and cultural critique. Channels that started with broad topics like real estate investing or video game reviews have pivoted heavily toward gender dynamics, offering breakdowns of behaviors, incentives, and risks using logical frameworks or even mathematical modeling. Creators applying structured reasoning to interpersonal patterns attract large followings by providing clarity in areas once dominated by emotion or social pressure. Gaming communities, once mixed, now feature prominent voices highlighting how industry changes affect men specifically, from narrative directions to representation debates. This creates closed loops where men consume, learn, and connect without needing external input, further reducing reliance on traditional mixed spaces. Economic behaviors underscore the sustainability of this shift. Single men consistently report higher savings rates and greater life satisfaction, even in challenging economic climates, embracing minimalism that focuses on essentials while investing surplus into personal growth or assets. They shoulder a majority of tax burdens, yet work fewer hours overall, contributing less revenue to systems that fund expansive social programs. Women, directing most consumer spending, face tightening circumstances as traditional funding sources dry up. Industries built around couple activities suffer. Upscale restaurants see declining reservations without men covering bills. Nightlife venues empty as men avoid environments heavy with expectations or risks. And bars fill with groups of women who lack the purchasing power to sustain operations long term. Physical fitness spaces tell a parallel story. Co ed gyms once thrived on mixed participation, but as men encountered complaints about presence, staring, or incidental contact, many relocated to home setups or private, invitation only facilities inaccessible to outsiders. This preserves training consistency without external interference, while mainstream gyms lose membership and revenue from the demographic that historically dominated attendance. Technological advancements promise to widen these divides even more. Artificial intelligence continues to advance in companionship and content generation, offering reliable. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Non-judgmental alternatives to human interaction. Young men form attachments to chat interfaces that provide conversation, support, and even simulated affection without the complexities of real relationships. In adult entertainment, projections suggest rapid displacement of human creators by AI generated material within the next couple of years, reducing platforms' dependence on individual performers and shifting economic flows. Men adapt by entering decentralized sectors like cryptocurrency trading, skill bartering networks, or prepper communities focused on self reliance, where trust circles exclude those outside proven alliances. Overseas options provide escape valves for men seeking different dynamics. Countries with lower living costs and cultural norms emphasizing compatibility draw Western men who relocate temporarily or permanently, leveraging income advantages to live comfortably while engaging with women described as more approachable and traditional. This further drains domestic pools of eligible partners, leaving Western women confronting reduced options. The cumulative weight of these choices creates parallel societies emerging within the same borders. Men build lives centered on independence, skill acquisition, and selective associations, finding fulfillment in solitude or male only networks. Women navigate the consequences of eroded support structures, from professional hurdles to economic pressures, as state resources strain under declining contributions. This is not revenge, but consequence. Systems designed for one outcome produce another when applied universally. Men have chosen peace through distance, and the structures once leaning on their participation now reveal their fragility. The consequences of this widespread withdrawal ripple outward in patterns that become more visible with each passing year, particularly in how entire industries quietly contract when one major participant group steps away. Consider the hospitality sector beyond just upscale dining. Mid-tier restaurants, casual chains, and even food delivery services built their business models around predictable patterns of male-funded outings, group celebrations, and date nights, where the expectation was that men would cover most or all of the tab. As men stopped initiating those outings, reservation books thinned, average check sizes dropped, and locations that once enjoyed steady weekend traffic began operating at half capacity during peak hours. Owners who once counted on consistent male spending to offset slim margins now face closures or drastic menu reductions, not because of inflation alone or changing tastes, but because the primary financial driver vanished from the equation. The same holds for live entertainment venues, concert promoters, and festival organizers who relied on couples and mixed groups to fill seats. When men no longer see value in attending events that carry social overhead or perceived judgment risks, ticket sales flatten, secondary markets dry up, and promoters scale back lineups or cancel tours outright. Nightlife follows an even sharper trajectory. Urban bars and clubs that once thrived on Friday and Saturday crowds, driven by men approaching, buying rounds, and extending evenings, now report floors filled mostly with groups of women who arrive together, order sparingly, and leave earlier because the traditional dynamic of male provision no longer exists. Bartenders notice the shift in real time. Fewer high value tabs, more splitting of single drinks among multiple people, and a noticeable drop in tips that used to come from generous gestures. Many venues have tried pivoting to women only events or themed nights to recapture revenue, but those efforts rarely sustain long term because the underlying economic engine was never female spending at scale. The result is a slow hollowing out of city nightlife districts, with shuttered storefronts replaced by vape shops, empty lots, or conversion to daytime uses. Men, meanwhile, have migrated their socializing to private gatherings, online multiplayer sessions, or low cost activities that require no external financial contribution from anyone else. Retail environments reveal another layer of this economic decoupling. Shopping malls, once anchors of suburban weekends with couples browsing together or men accompanying partners on errands, now see declining foot traffic during non holiday periods. Luxury brands that depended on men purchasing gifts, accessories, or even clothing for dates face shrinking sales volumes as those occasions disappear from calendars. Department stores report that sections traditionally driven by male wallets, watches, fragrances, formal wear languish while clearance racks grow. Fast fashion and beauty retailers, heavily oriented toward female consumers, maintain volume only through aggressive discounting and loyalty programs, but profit margins compress because the discretionary spending power that once flowed freely has tightened. Men have embraced a minimalist wardrobe philosophy, buying fewer, higher quality items less frequently, often directly from brands or secondhand markets that bypass traditional retail entirely. Fitness and wellness industries show parallel contraction. Large chain gyms invested heavily in expansive facilities, classes marketed to women, and amenities designed to attract mixed crowds. When men began leaving in significant numbers, citing discomfort from constant monitoring of behavior, complaints about incidental eye contact, or simply preferring solitude. Membership roles tilted heavily female. Revenue followed the same path downward because men historically accounted for the majority of consistent long term memberships and higher spending on supplements, personal training, and premium add ons. Chains responded with price increases or new women focused programming, but the math did not recover. Smaller boutique studios fared better in some cases by going fully single sex or invitation based, but the broader industry faces a reckoning as overall participation drops. Men who left built home gyms with compact equipment, followed structured online programs, or joined private training groups that operate under strict membership rules, preserving their physical discipline without the social friction. Education and professional certification spaces feel the shift as well. Fields that once saw steady male enrollment in advanced degrees or technical training programs now report declining numbers among men who see diminishing returns in systems that impose additional scrutiny or quotas. Men increasingly pursue self directed learning through online platforms, trade apprenticeships, or entrepreneurial paths that bypass institutional gatekeepers. Women fill more seats in university lecture halls, but the long term economic payoff narrows when men dominate emerging high earning sectors like blockchain development, autonomous systems engineering, or decentralized finance. The credentialing treadmill slows for everyone when one group opts out, reducing competition in some areas while creating new hierarchies elsewhere. Public policy and taxation reveal perhaps the most structural consequence. Governments in developed nations have long relied on progressive tax structures where higher earning individuals, disproportionately men, fund expansive social safety nets, education subsidies, and gender specific programs. As men reduce hours worked, shift to lower taxed income streams, relocate to lower cost jurisdictions, or exit formal employment entirely through early retirement or gig based self employment, the revenue base shrinks. Budget deficits widen, forcing cuts to programs that once depended on that surplus. Women who traded traditional male provision for state backed independence now confront the reality that the state itself faces insolvency when the primary contributors withdraw. Calls for men to return to previous roles grow louder in policy circles, but the response remains consistent. Disengagement continues because the perceived costs outweigh any remaining benefits. Family court systems illustrate the point with brutal clarity. Decades of reforms aimed at protecting women and children from perceived male dominance led to presumptions and procedures that tilted heavily in one direction. Men, observing outcomes where financial ruin, restricted access to children, and permanent legal jeopardy followed even contested separations, adjusted behavior preemptively. Marriage rates plummeted, cohabitation agreements became rarer, and men who did enter relationships insisted on ironclad documentation or simply avoided legal entanglements altogether. The system designed to enforce support obligations now operates on a shrinking pool of participants, creating backlogs, enforcement challenges, and mounting unpaid obligations that further strain public resources. Judges and administrators quietly acknowledge the feedback loop. Harsher measures produce fewer willing entrants, which in turn produces even harsher enforcement attempts, accelerating the exodus. Demographic momentum compounds these effects. Nations already grappling with aging populations face accelerated workforce contraction when younger men delay or forego family formation. Pension systems strain under fewer contributors supporting more retirees. Housing markets in family oriented suburbs soften as demand for larger homes declines. Schools consolidate or close when enrollment drops year after year. Economic forecasters warn of stagnation or outright decline in gross domestic product when consumption patterns shift toward minimalism and production tilts toward export oriented or digital first models dominated by men. The birth rate collapse is not a side effect, it is the central mechanism through which withdrawal reshapes national futures. Cultural output changes in tandem. Literature, film, and television once reflected mixed gender dynamics as a default. As men disengage from those narratives, creators face shrinking audiences for stories built around traditional romance arcs or couple centered conflict. Streaming platforms report declining completion rates for series heavy on interpersonal drama, while content focused on solitary achievement, technical mastery, or abstract problem solving gains traction among remaining viewers. Music genres shift toward themes of independence and self reliance, with lyrics that once celebrated partnership giving way to anthems of solitude. The cultural conversation narrows when one half of the population stops participating in its creation and consumption. Men who have completed this transition describe a consistent set of gains: restored mental clarity, financial acceleration, physical consistency, and freedom from constant performance evaluation. Happiness surveys conducted among single men in their 30s and 40s show upward trends even as broader societal mood indicators decline. They invest time in hobbies once sidelined by relationship obligations, mechanical restoration, competitive gaming, wilderness exploration, skill acquisition in trades or coding. Savings compound faster without dual household expenses or discretionary gifts. Peace becomes tangible when interactions carry no unspoken scorecard. Women navigating the same landscape encounter the inverse. Professional networks thin without informal male allies. Social circles contract when mutual friends align with one side or simply fade away. Dating pools shrink to a narrow band of men still willing to engage, most of whom maintain multiple connections simultaneously. Financial independence proves more fragile than anticipated when consumer habits meet reduced earning power or stagnant wages in feminized sectors. The promise of state substitution weakens as fiscal realities bite. The anger that once fueled demands now confronts a quiet, immovable wall of absence. This is not a coordinated campaign, but an organic convergence of individual decisions guided by experience. Each man who walks away cites similar catalysts: repeated negative outcomes, perceived double standards, accumulating risk without proportional reward. The aggregate becomes a societal pivot point. Parallel economies emerge, barter networks, trading skills and goods within trusted male circles, cryptocurrency wallets bypassing traditional finance, prepper supply chains built on mutual aid among like minded individuals. Women find themselves excluded not by explicit bans, but by simple lack of invitation or trust. Service providers and trades quietly adjust pricing when female clients call, reflecting perceived risk or lack of reciprocal goodwill. The market answers with economics rather than ideology. The trajectory points toward deeper separation unless fundamental incentives realign. Men show no sign of returning under current conditions. They have tasted independence and found it superior to entanglement. Women face the task of rebuilding from a position of reduced leverage. Society adjusts around the new equilibrium, one closed door at a time. The separation deepens further when we examine how men have begun restructuring their financial lives around principles of extreme self sufficiency and minimal external dependency. In the past, many men maintained higher consumption levels partly to support shared lifestyles, whether that meant funding joint vacations, household upgrades, or simply keeping pace with expectations during courtship and partnership phases. Now, with those phases largely eliminated from their calendars, Disposable income redirects toward assets that compound rather than depreciate. Index funds receive consistent monthly contributions that once went to dinners, gifts, or joint entertainment subscriptions. Cryptocurrency wallets grow through disciplined dollar cost averaging rather than impulse purchases for someone else. Real estate decisions shift from family sized properties in school districts to compact, low maintenance units or even nomadic setups that allow relocation without long term anchors. The result is a compounding wealth gap that favors those who exited the traditional provider role early. Men in their late 20s and early 30s who adopted this mindset 5 or 6 years ago now sit on portfolios that would have taken decades longer under the old model. This financial reorientation feeds directly into housing market transformations that few predicted a decade ago. Suburban developments, once marketed toward young families, now struggle to move inventory because the buyer profile has changed. Three-bedroom homes with fenced yards sit longer on listing sites, while smaller condos, townhouses, and micro apartments in walkable urban cores or remote friendly exurbs see quicker turnover among single men prioritizing low overhead and high flexibility. Builders respond by scaling back square footage, eliminating unnecessary bedrooms, and focusing on features that appeal to solo occupants. Home offices with dedicated high speed internet wiring, compact gyms in basements, soundproof media rooms for uninterrupted gaming or streaming. Real estate agents report that open houses on weekends attract fewer couples and more individual men asking pointed questions about HOA restrictions on home modifications, solar panel incentives, and proximity to hiking trails rather than school ratings. The dream of the starter home as a stepping stone to family expansion fades when the family expansion step itself disappears from most male life plans. Transportation patterns shift in lockstep. Car manufacturers notice declining demand for larger SUVs and minivans designed around car seat capacity and cargo space for multiple passengers. Sales pivot toward compact crossovers, electric sedans, and motorcycles that prioritize solo efficiency and weekend escapes. Ride sharing usage among men drops sharply outside of business travel because the primary use case, late night pickups after dates or group outings, has evaporated. Men who once split Uber fares or drove friends home now walk, bike, or simply stay in. Public transit ridership among working age men continues its downward trend in many cities, not only because of remote work, but because the social friction of mixed crowded spaces outweighs any convenience. Those who still commute often choose off peak hours, stand rather than sit, or drive personal vehicles to avoid interaction entirely. The transportation sector, long built on assumptions of shared mobility, recalibrates toward individual ownership and minimal contact options. Energy and utility consumption patterns tell a similar story of contraction. Households once averaged higher electricity and water usage from dual occupants cooking elaborate meals, running multiple entertainment devices simultaneously, or maintaining larger living spaces. Single male households trend toward lower baselines. LED lighting everywhere, minimalist appliances, shorter showers, and deliberate avoidance of energy intensive hobbies that require constant powering. Utility companies in regions with heavy male withdrawal report slower growth in residential demand, forcing rate hikes on remaining customers to cover fixed infrastructure costs. Solar panel installations spike among men who view energy independence as an extension of personal sovereignty, further reducing reliance on centralized grids that fund broad social programs through regressive rate structures. Food systems feel the pinch at every level. Grocery chains that expanded organic sections, prepared meal kits, and premium wine aisles to capture female driven spending see those categories stagnate while bulk protein powders, frozen vegetables, and simple staples move faster among cost conscious single men. Restaurants that survived the initial dating drought by pivoting to takeout now face another wave of pressure as men cook basic high protein meals at home using batch prep methods learned from online fitness communities. Food delivery apps report that average order values from male users fall below female averages because the orders serve one person rather than two or more. Agricultural producers adjust planting decisions when demand for certain luxury crops tied to date night aesthetics declines, while staples for minimalist diets hold steady or grow. Healthcare utilization diverges along gender lines in measurable ways. Men who once delayed routine checkups during relationship phases now schedule them proactively because peace of mind ranks higher without competing emotional demands. Preventive care visits increase among single men in their 30s, leading to earlier detection of issues and better long term outcomes. Women, conversely, face longer wait times in systems strained by workforce shortages as male providers exit clinical fields or reduce hours to avoid liability exposure in litigious environments. Mental health services see a surge in male clients seeking tools for sustained independence rather than couples counseling, while female demand tilts toward support for navigating isolation and economic stress. Insurance pools shift risk profiles when one demographic opts for catastrophic coverage only and pays cash for routine needs, leaving the broader system to absorb higher claims from the other side. Legal and insurance industries adapt to the new risk calculus. Family law practices shrink as marriage and cohabitation rates fall, forcing attorneys to diversify into estate planning for single, high net worth individuals or contract disputes in decentralized business networks. Divorce filings drop not because relationships improve, but because fewer people enter binding legal unions in the first place. Prenuptial agreements, once niche, become standard boilerplate among the minority who still marry, with terms that heavily favor asset protection. Liability insurance premiums in male dominated trades rise when providers limit service to trusted networks, reflecting the perception that female clients carry higher complaint risk even when unfounded. The legal framework built around protecting one group now operates in a vacuum as the other group simply declines to participate. International migration flows accelerate the domestic hollowing. Men with portable skills or remote income streams relocate to regions where cost of living aligns with reduced earning needs and cultural expectations favor straightforward interactions. Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and parts of Latin America see steady inflows of Western men in their 30s and 40s who establish small businesses, invest in local real estate, or live off passive income while enjoying social dynamics free of the scrutiny they left behind. These men rarely return permanently, instead, maintaining dual bases or full relocation. The brain drain compounds when high earning men exit high tax jurisdictions, further starving domestic treasuries. Remittances flow outward rather than inward, supporting foreign economies while local ones contract. Education pipelines reflect the long term reorientation. Boys and young men increasingly bypass 4 year degrees in favor of trade certifications, coding boot camps, or entrepreneurial ventures that promise quicker returns without massive debt. STEM fields, once balanced by mixed enrollment, now skew harder toward male participation in sub-disciplines tied to emerging technologies, while humanities and social sciences become even more female dominated. The resulting credential mismatch creates labor shortages in certain high skill areas dominated by men who left institutional paths early, and surpluses in others where state funding props up enrollment without corresponding job creation. Military recruitment and national service face parallel challenges. Volunteer forces in Western nations struggle to meet quotas when young men perceive institutional environments as extensions of the same risk averse, scrutiny heavy cultures they already exited in civilian life. Training pipelines slow, readiness levels decline, and reliance on technology to offset personnel gaps increases. The warrior ethos that once drew men fades when the same society, questioning male behavior in peacetime, expects unquestioning sacrifice in conflict. Religious institutions feel the absence acutely. Churches, mosques, and synagogues that once relied on family units for membership and tithing see congregations age rapidly as younger men stop attending altogether. Sermons once centered on marital duty and fatherhood pivot toward individual spiritual discipline or community service without relational framing. Donation patterns shift toward secular causes or direct charity controlled by the giver rather than institutional coffers. The arts suffer a quiet crisis of audience and patronage. Theater companies, galleries, and orchestras built on mixed gender attendance and couple outings face shrinking subscriber bases. Ticket sales rely more heavily on female groups or corporate sponsorships, but cultural relevance narrows when half the potential audience disengages. Creators respond by producing work that speaks to solitary reflection or abstract themes rather than relational drama, further alienating those still seeking traditional narratives. Through all of this, men maintain a consistent internal narrative. The cost benefit equation flipped permanently. What was once viewed as mutual exchange became perceived as extraction followed by penalty. Withdrawal solved the equation by removing the variable entirely. Happiness metrics stabilize or rise because baseline expectations reset to self reliance rather than external validation. The anger that once simmered in online forums gives way to quiet satisfaction in lives built on personal terms. Women encounter the mirror image. Structures once leaned upon now wobble or collapse when the counterweight disappears. Professional advancement slows without informal networks. Social capital erodes when mutual connections fade. Economic security frays when consumer habits meet contracting income streams. The independence, once celebrated, reveals its dependence on a participation that no longer exists. This divergence is not temporary. Each year of sustained disengagement entrenches new habits, new markets, new norms. Reversing it would require incentives strong enough to outweigh the peace already secured. Those incentives remain absent. The trajectory continues, reshaping society around absence rather than presence, around minimalism rather than expansion, around solitude rather than entanglement. The withdrawal has now reached a point where it influences even the most basic rhythms of daily decision making among men who have fully committed to this path. Mornings once structured around preparing for shared routines, making extra coffee, coordinating schedules, or planning evening returns, now follow streamlined sequences designed purely for personal efficiency. Alarms trigger at precise times, optimized for individual circadian patterns rather than compromise. Breakfast consists of high protein shakes or eggs cooked in bulk for the week, eliminating the negotiation over meal preferences or portion sizes that once accompanied cohabitation. Wardrobes stay simple. 5 or 6 versatile outfits rotated indefinitely, purchased secondhand or from utilitarian brands that prioritize durability over trends. Grooming routines shrink to under 10 minutes, focused on hygiene and minimal maintenance rather than presentation for external approval. These micro adjustments accumulate into hours reclaimed each week hours that flow directly into skill building, side projects, or pure rest. Afternoons shift towards solitary productivity blocks, uninterrupted by incoming messages seeking emotional check ins or logistical coordination. Men who once balanced full time employment with relationship maintenance now treat their workday as a fortress of focus. Remote setups feature noise canceling headphones, dual monitors dedicated to separate streams of work and learning, and strict boundaries around availability. Lunch breaks become opportunities for quick workouts, language study through audio lessons, or reading technical documentation instead of restaurant meetups or phone conversations. The mental bandwidth once allocated to anticipating partner needs or diffusing minor conflicts redirects toward long term compounding activities, mastering new programming languages, building small automated trading scripts, restoring vintage tools, or documenting processes for future passive income streams. Evening hours, previously fragmented by social obligations or date planning, transform into deep work sessions that stretch until natural fatigue sets in, followed by deliberate wind down rituals involving meditation apps, stoic reading, or strategy games that reward individual mastery. Weekends, once dominated by couple errands, family visits, or group outings, now operate under a framework of deliberate recharge and advancement. Saturday mornings might involve trail running at dawn when trails remain empty, followed by grocery runs timed to avoid peak crowds. Afternoons fill with hands on projects, welding practice in a rented shop space, 3D printing prototypes for personal inventions, or mechanical repairs on personal vehicles that double as skill sharpening. Evenings become windows for immersive hobbies, competitive online chess tournaments, flight simulator sessions with realistic hardware, or deep dives into historical documentaries chosen for intellectual stimulation rather than shared entertainment value. Sunday resets follow the same logic: meal prep for the week ahead, financial reviews that include stress testing portfolios against various economic scenarios, and strategic planning for the coming months. Social contact, when it occurs, happens almost exclusively with other men pursuing parallel paths, usually through structured meetups focused on shared interests like firearms training, crypto discussions, or wilderness survival drills. This rhythm produces measurable physiological changes over time. Resting heart rates trend lower as chronic low level stress from relational dynamics fades. Sleep quality improves dramatically when bedtime decisions no longer involve negotiation or compromise. Testosterone levels stabilize or rise in many cases, supported by consistent resistance training, high fat diets, and elimination of sleep disrupting arguments or late night emotional processing. Body composition shifts toward leaner, stronger builds maintained through disciplined programming rather than sporadic gym visits driven by appearance concerns. Cortisol patterns flatten, reducing the background anxiety that once accompanied constant social performance evaluation. Men in their 30s and 40s frequently report feeling physically 10 to 15 years younger than their chronological age would suggest, attributing the difference to the removal of invisible relational taxes on recovery and energy allocation. Cognitive effects prove equally pronounced. Working memory capacity appears to expand when the brain no longer maintains parallel mental models of another person's emotional state, upcoming needs, or unspoken expectations. Executive function sharpens as decisions simplify to binary choices: pursue the objective or do not. Problem solving speed increases in technical domains because attention remains undiluted for hours at a time. Creativity in practical fields, engineering solutions, trading strategies, content frameworks flourishes when unconstrained by the need to make ideas palatable or collaborative. Men describe a return to the focused mental state they last experienced in late adolescence before relational layers began accumulating. The fog that many once attributed to aging or overwork lifts, revealing that much of it stemmed from sustained low grade relational load rather than biological decline. Financial trajectories diverge even more sharply under these conditions. Compound interest works relentlessly when monthly savings rates climb from 10 or 15% to 50 or 60% of after tax income. A man earning a median professional salary who previously spent heavily on shared lifestyle inflation can now amass seven-figure net worth by his mid-40s through disciplined indexing, selective real estate purchases in cash flow positive markets, and opportunistic entries into high conviction assets. Debt loads plummet or disappear entirely as consumer credit usage drops to near zero outside of strategic leverage in business ventures. Tax optimization becomes a serious pursuit, maximizing retirement accounts, harvesting losses, structuring side income through entities that minimize liability exposure. Geographic arbitrage accelerates the process, maintaining residency in low tax states or countries while earning in high value currencies. The outcome is not merely comfort, but genuine anti fragility, the ability to weather economic storms without lifestyle contraction. Social dynamics within male circles evolve into something more intentional and reciprocal than the mixed environments they replaced. Friendships form around demonstrated competence rather than proximity or shared history. Trust builds through consistent action, showing up prepared, delivering on promises, respecting boundaries rather than emotional disclosure. Conversations center on tangible topics: market setups, gear reviews, skill progression benchmarks, geopolitical risk assessments. Banter exists but stays light and functional, never veering into territory that invites misinterpretation or escalation. Conflicts resolve quickly through direct communication or temporary distance rather than prolonged mediation. These networks provide the camaraderie once sought in romantic partnerships, but without the accompanying volatility or resource drain. Loyalty emerges from mutual utility and respect rather than obligation, creating bonds that prove more durable under pressure. Interactions with institutions change in character as well. Customer service encounters become brief and transactional. Men state requirements clearly, accept offered solutions, or walk away without negotiation. Returns, complaints, or escalations occur only when justified by objective failure rather than subjective dissatisfaction. This approach reduces friction and preserves emotional capital for more valuable pursuits. Professional relationships follow the same pattern. Contracts specify deliverables precisely, performance metrics remain transparent, and collaboration ends cleanly when objectives conclude. The old habit of over accommodating to maintain harmony disappears, replaced by mutual accountability that respects everyone's time. Exposure to mainstream media and advertising diminishes to almost nothing. News consumption narrows to primary sources and curated summaries from trusted voices within male centric networks. Entertainment arrives through platforms that allow complete control over pacing and content. Long form podcasts during workouts, technical lectures on demand, archived lectures from independent scholars. Advertising loses its grip when spending habits no longer align with the promoted lifestyle. The constant psychological pressure to signal status through consumption evaporates when status derives from internal metrics: net worth trajectory, physical capability, knowledge depth, strategic positioning. Philosophical outlooks tend to converge towards certain recurring themes. Stoicism gains practical traction because its emphasis on controlling internals while accepting externals matches lived experience. Existentialism resonates when meaning emerges from self directed projects rather than inherited roles. Evolutionary psychology frameworks provide explanatory power for observed patterns without requiring moral judgment. Minimalism evolves from aesthetic preference into comprehensive life operating system. The common thread is sovereignty, ownership of time, attention, resources, and emotional state. External validation loses currency when internal reference points prove more reliable and less manipulable. Women navigating the same period encounter widening asymmetries. Professional environments grow more competitive when informal support structures vanish. Networking events feel emptier without the mixed attendance that once created natural crossover opportunities. Mentorship dries up when potential male mentors limit guidance to formal channels or avoid it entirely. Dating remains sporadic and often unsatisfying as remaining options cluster into narrow archetypes unwilling to commit or already managing multiple connections. Social invitations decrease when couple oriented activities fade from calendars. Consumer debt accumulates faster in environments where spending fills emotional gaps left by relational absence. State assistance programs face lengthening wait lists and reduce funding as fiscal bases contract. The divergence solidifies into separate tracks. One group advances through disciplined subtraction, removing friction, lowering overhead, focusing energy inward. The other group contends with the compounding effects of absence, eroded leverage, thinning networks, tightening budgets. Neither side appears poised to reverse course voluntarily. Incentives point in opposite directions, deeper independence versus increasing dependence on shrinking systems. This separation is no longer hypothetical or fringe. It manifests in census data, tax receipts, birth registries, commercial real estate vacancy rates, university enrollment splits, military enlistment shortfalls, church pew occupancy, bar closing notices, gym membership churn, grocery basket composition, car dealership lot configurations, housing starts by square footage, migration statistics, and countless other measurable indicators. The pattern repeats across developed economies with only minor variations in timing and cultural expression. The process has moved beyond debate into observable reality. Men who travel this road describe a consistent endpoint, arrival at a state where external participation is optional rather than necessary. Fulfillment no longer requires another person's presence. Peace arrives not as dramatic revelation, but as the quiet absence of previously normalized tension. Life becomes simpler, sharper, and more fully owned. The situation has now progressed to a stage where men systematically audit and eliminate every remaining point of unnecessary interface with systems or individuals that once extracted value without equivalent return. Bank accounts get restructured to minimize fees and maximize automation. Direct deposits split across high yield accounts. Bill pay set to auto draft only essentials. Credit cards reduced to one or two with the highest rewards on actual spending categories like fuel and groceries. Subscription creep gets hunted down ruthlessly. Streaming services consolidated to a single platform rotated quarterly. Gym memberships replaced by bodyweight circuits and pull up bars installed in garages. Meal delivery apps deleted after one trial because cooking 30 meals for the price of 3 deliveries proves mathematically superior. Every recurring charge undergoes a quarterly review where the question asked is binary. Does this add measurable utility to my life right now, or is it a relic of a previous version of me? If the answer tilts negative, cancellation happens within 60 seconds. Digital hygiene follows the same logic, but with even greater intensity. Social media feeds get pruned to near zero outside of purpose built professional or interest based groups. Notifications turned off permanently, except for direct messages from verified contacts on encrypted channels. Email inboxes maintained at inbox zero through aggressive filtering rules and 5-minute daily processing windows. Browser extensions block trackers, ads, and recommendation algorithms so that when research occurs, it stays laser focused rather than spiraling into hours of suggested content. Smartphone usage drops to under 90 minutes a day for most men who have completed this phase, with screen time reports treated as performance metrics rather than casual observations. The phone becomes a tool again instead of a tether, used for navigation, two factor authentication, quick voice notes for ideas, and occasional voice calls to family or close allies. The dopamine loop, once fueled by endless scrolling, collapses, replaced by sustained attention spans that allow genuine absorption of complex material. Physical environments undergo parallel transformation. Living spaces shrink deliberately to match actual needs rather than projected future ones. Studio apartments or small one bedrooms become preferred because they force efficiency. One room serves multiple functions with modular furniture that reconfigures in minutes. Storage gets minimized to what fits in a single closet and a few bins. Seasonal clothing rotated biannually, tools organized in labeled drawers, books culled to a core library of 50 or fewer volumes that get reread rather than accumulated. Decor stays sparse. One or two pieces of meaningful art, functional lighting, plants chosen for air purification rather than aesthetics. The goal is a space that can be deep cleaned in under an hour and packed for relocation in a single afternoon if circumstances demand it. Rent or mortgage payments stay below 25% of after tax income to preserve optionality. Many men now keep 6 to 12 months of expenses in liquid cash equivalents so that employment can be treated as optional rather than existential. Mobility itself becomes a strategic asset. Vehicles get selected for reliability, fuel efficiency, and low maintenance cost rather than status signaling. A 10-year-old sedan with 200,000 miles that still passes emissions and gets 35 miles per gallon often beats a new crossover in total cost of ownership calculations. Motorcycles or electric bikes serve as secondary transport for short distances, cutting fuel and parking expenses while providing an outlet for adrenaline that once came from riskier social pursuits. Some men go fully car free in dense urban cores, relying on walking, public transit during off hours, and occasional ride shares for heavy errands. Others maintain a small network of trusted friends with trucks for the rare occasion when hauling becomes necessary. The underlying principle remains constant: own as little depreciating metal as possible while retaining full freedom of movement. Nutrition gets engineered with the precision once reserved for athletic competition. Macros tracked not for vanity, but for sustained energy and cognitive clarity. High protein to preserve muscle under caloric restriction. Moderate healthy fats for hormone stability. Low refined carbohydrates to avoid insulin spikes that dull focus. Weekly meal plans rotate around 10 to 12 staple ingredients bought in bulk: eggs, ground turkey, frozen berries, spinach, sweet potatoes, oats, Greek yogurt, almonds, olive oil, canned salmon, rice, broccoli. Cooking happens in batch sessions on Sunday evenings, portioned into glass containers that stack neatly in the fridge. Supplements stay minimal and evidence based. Vitamin D for latitudes with limited sun, magnesium for sleep quality, creatine for strength maintenance, fish oil for inflammation control. Eating out drops to rarity status once a month at most, and only at places where the value equation still makes sense. like a straightforward steakhouse that charges fair prices for protein without upselling sides or cocktails. Training regimens evolve into lifelong systems rather than temporary phases. Most men settle into 3 to 5 day per week programs built around compound movements: squat, deadlift, bench, overhead press, pull ups or rows, loaded carries. Progression happens slowly and methodically, adding 2.5 pounds to the bar every 2 to 4 weeks, deloading only when necessary to avoid burnout. Cardio stays functional, rucking with a weighted pack for distance, hill sprints for conditioning, occasional kettlebell swings for metabolic conditioning. Flexibility work gets 10 minutes daily through basic yoga flows or dynamic stretching to maintain joint health into later decades. Recovery becomes non negotiable. 8 hours of sleep protected by blackout curtains and consistent bedtime, sauna or cold exposure 2 to 3 times weekly for cardiovascular and mental resilience, foam rolling or massage gun sessions to address tightness before it becomes injury. The body stops being a project to be sculpted for approval and becomes a machine maintained for durability and capability. Intellectual pursuits fill the space once occupied by relational drama. Men dive into subjects that reward cumulative effort, learning Mandarin or Spanish through daily immersion apps and conversation exchanges with native speakers abroad, studying formal logic to sharpen argumentation, reading primary texts in philosophy from Plato through Nietzsche to contemporary analytic thinkers, mastering probability and statistics to improve decision making under uncertainty, exploring military history to understand group dynamics and power structures, dissecting economic cycles to position capital advantageously. Learning becomes gamified internally. Anki decks for spaced repetition of key concepts, quarterly deep dive projects that produce tangible outputs like blog posts, small software tools, or investment theses shared in private discords. The reward loop shifts from external likes to the quiet satisfaction of genuine competence growth. Risk management extends beyond finance into every domain. Legal exposure gets minimized through avoidance rather than defense. Never signing contracts with ambiguous terms. Documenting every significant interaction in writing, maintaining zero tolerance for situations that could generate false allegations. Physical risk gets calibrated, carrying tools for self defense where legal, training situational awareness through regular scenario drills, choosing routes and times that minimize vulnerability. Digital risk stays low through compartmentalization, separate devices or virtual machines for high privacy activities, end to end encrypted communication, regular password rotations, avoidance of platforms known for data harvesting. Health risk gets addressed preemptively with annual blood panels tracking biomarkers that predict future disease rather than waiting for symptoms. Community, when it forms, organizes around utility and low drama. Small groups of 5 to 15 men meet monthly or quarterly for skill shares, teaching each other welding, coding, marksmanship, wilderness first aid, tax strategies, physical training programming. These gatherings stay focused. Arrive on time, teach or learn, eat simple food together, depart without lingering. No gossip, no venting about ex partners, no virtue signaling. Contribution determines inclusion. Consistent value delivered earns trust, while freeloaders or drama magnets get quietly excluded. Larger networks exist online in private channels where men post field reports on relocation experiences, business setups, legal workarounds, gear reviews. Information flows freely because the group self selects for high agency and low tolerance for nonsense. Long term visioning replaces short term gratification seeking. 5 year plans center on location independence, building income streams that can be earned from anywhere with internet or no internet at all. 10-year horizons include full geographic optionality. Passports from multiple jurisdictions, property in low regulation areas, citizenship paths through investment or ancestry. 20-year outlooks focus on legacy through knowledge transfer. Documenting systems so younger men can shortcut years of trial and error, mentoring selectively within trusted circles, creating open source tools or guides that outlive the creator. The endpoint is sovereignty at scale. No single point of failure, no dependency on any institution or individual, full control over time and trajectory. Women experience the inverse geometry. Daily decisions remain entangled with external variables, waiting for responses that never arrive, adjusting plans around unpredictable schedules, spending mental energy decoding mixed signals, or managing emotional fallout from ghosting. Professional environments grow colder when casual alliances disappear. Social calendars, thin as events once filled by couples, become women only or simply dissolve. Financial buffers erode faster when income growth stalls in saturated fields while expenses hold or rise to maintain appearances. Health markers often trend in the opposite direction. Higher cortisol from sustained uncertainty, disrupted sleep from rumination, inconsistent training due to motivation tied to external validation rather than internal discipline. The two paths continue diverging at an accelerating rate. One side subtracts noise and compounds signal. The other side contends with accumulating noise and diluted signal. Neither appears inclined to course correct under present conditions. The separation hardens into structural fact. The process of complete detachment eventually reaches a threshold where external inputs no longer shape internal states in any meaningful way. Men who have traveled this far stop measuring progress against societal benchmarks, home ownership timelines, relationship milestones, career ladder rungs, and replace those yardsticks with private, self referenced metrics that nobody else can influence or critique. One such metric might be the number of consecutive days without consuming any form of mainstream newsfeed, a streak tracked not for bragging rights, but because each day, free of outrage cycles, preserves mental bandwidth for actual problem solving. Another could be the exact percentage of waking hours spent in flow state versus reactive mode, with adjustments made immediately when the ratio dips below a personally set threshold. A third might track net caloric surplus or deficit against precise body composition goals maintained year round without seasonal fluctuations driven by social calendars or partner preferences. These internal scorecards create a closed feedback loop. Action produces data. Data informs adjustment. Adjustment refines action. And the entire cycle runs without requiring approval, permission, or even awareness from anyone outside the individual. This self contained operating system extends to emotional regulation, where earlier stages involved deliberate suppression of reactivity to avoid escalation in mixed environments, later stages eliminate the trigger conditions entirely. Potential sources of frustration, unreliable service, bureaucratic delays, interpersonal slights get neutralized before they register as emotional events. A delayed package arrives 2 days late. The response is a one-line email requesting a refund of shipping cost and immediate reorder from a different vendor, executed in under 90 seconds, then forgotten. A colleague sends a passive aggressive message. The reply consists of three factual sentences clarifying the misunderstanding, copied to relevant parties for documentation, then archived. No rumination follows because the mental model no longer includes the assumption that other people's behavior carries existential weight. Anger, when it arises, gets channeled into productive outlets, extra sets in the gym, a harder ruck march, a focused coding sprint, rather than verbal processing or revenge fantasies. The nervous system downregulates over months until baseline arousal sits noticeably lower, creating a physiological state that feels like permanent mild sedation without any chemical assistance. Decision velocity increases dramatically in this environment. Choices that once required days of internal debate or consultation now resolve in minutes because the variable set shrinks to three core filters. Does this move me closer to sovereignty? Does it increase optionality? Does it introduce unnecessary dependency? If the answer fails any filter, the default becomes no. A job offer arrives with 20% more pay, but mandatory office attendance 3 days per week. Rejection email drafted and sent before the end of the call. An acquaintance suggests a group trip, polite decline citing prior commitments, followed by immediate calendar block on those dates to protect solitude. A woman reaches out after months of silence with an ambiguous, "Hey, how have you been?" message. No response generated because the equation yields negative utility on every axis: time cost, emotional overhead, legal exposure risk. The speed of rejection becomes a source of quiet power rather than guilt because each no preserves resources for yeses that actually matter to the individual. Resource allocation follows ruthless prioritization. Time gets treated as the scarcest asset, divided into protected blocks: deep work, physical training, skill acquisition, strategic planning, recovery. Anything that cannot justify its slot against those categories gets eliminated without ceremony. Money flows through a similar sieve. Every dollar assigned to one of five buckets: emergency fund, investment principal, skill building tools, low cost living maintenance, calculated experiments. The experiment bucket stays small and deliberate, testing a new nootropic stack for 3 months with before and after cognitive testing, trialing a different tax advantaged structure in a low regulation jurisdiction, piloting a side venture with capped downside. Waste gets measured in basis points. A single unnecessary coffee purchase registers as a tiny but cumulative leak that must be plugged. The cumulative effect over years turns modest incomes into formidable war chests, while high earners accelerate toward escape velocity from conventional economic participation. Geographic strategy becomes a core competency. Men who reach this level maintain what amounts to a personal escape matrix: current primary location rated against cost of living index, tax burden, legal climate for asset protection, proximity to quality training facilities, internet reliability for remote income, and ease of exit should conditions deteriorate. Secondary and tertiary locations get kept warm through periodic visits, 2 weeks every quarter in a favored low cost country to maintain relationships with local contacts, renew visas if needed, scout new properties. Passports multiply when possible, ancestry based citizenships pursued methodically, investment residencies secured with minimal physical presence requirements, digital nomad visas stacked for flexibility. The psychological shift is profound. No single flag or zip code owns the individual anymore. Home ceases to be a fixed address and becomes wherever the current optimal conditions align for productivity and peace. Interpersonal minimalism reaches its logical endpoint. Contact lists shrink to under 50 names. Immediate family, a handful of high trust male allies, key professional connectors, emergency medical contacts. Christmas card lists vanish entirely. Holiday obligations reduced to a single group message or nothing at all. Small talk evaporates from daily life. Interactions default to purpose driven exchanges that conclude efficiently. When conversation does occur, it stays surface level by design: weather, logistics, shared interest updates, never drifting into personal disclosures that could create leverage points later. The old social contract of reciprocal emotional labor gets quietly voided. Nobody owes anybody else validation, sympathy, or extended listening. Reciprocity survives only in high value trades. I teach you advanced option strategies. You show me local real estate arbitrage opportunities in your city. The relationship ends cleanly when the mutual utility expires. Sexual energy gets redirected with clinical precision. Libido remains intact, but decouples from pursuit behavior. Physical outlets, intense training, cold exposure, fasting protocols channel excess drive into heightened focus and aggression control. Digital alternatives provide frictionless release when needed, stripped of any parasocial attachment. Overseas travel occasionally includes adult entertainment in jurisdictions where transactions remain straightforward and low drama, treated as logistical relief rather than emotional connection. The overarching rule stays consistent: no entanglement that carries forward liability, whether legal, financial, or psychological. Desire exists, but never dictates behavior. It gets managed like any other biological variable, fed when necessary, starved when counterproductive, always subordinated to long term objectives. Legacy thinking emerges late in this progression, but carries surprising weight. Men begin documenting systems not for public consumption, but for potential transmission to a small circle of younger individuals who demonstrate serious intent. Detailed guides get written on topics ranging from multi jurisdictional asset structuring to minimalist lifestyle architecture to psychological frameworks for sustained detachment. These documents remain private or semi private, shared only after rigorous vetting of the recipient's agency and reliability. The motivation is not altruism in the traditional sense, but self preservation through redundancy. If one man perfects a survivable path, duplicating that path across a trusted network creates resilience against systemic shocks. Knowledge transfer becomes a force multiplier rather than a charitable act. Philosophical anchors solidify around a handful of recurring principles: control what you can, accept what you cannot, and ruthlessly shrink the second category. Meaning derives from voluntary imposition of difficulty rather than avoidance of pain. Freedom is measured in degrees of optionality rather than rights granted by institutions. Happiness correlates most strongly with sovereignty over time and attention rather than external achievements or relationships. Suffering decreases proportionally to the elimination of unnecessary dependencies. These are not abstract slogans, but battle tested conclusions drawn from years of lived experimentation. Women traversing the parallel timeline encounter escalating structural headwinds. Professional ladders grow steeper when informal sponsorship disappears. Peer networks contract when shared relational context vanishes. Dating markets consolidate further into winner take all dynamics, where a tiny fraction of men command disproportionate attention while the majority opt out entirely. Financial independence proves more brittle than advertised when wage growth in female dominated fields stagnates relative to inflation and living costs. Social isolation compounds as friendship circles thin without the glue of mutual couple activities. State support systems strain under demographic contraction, delivering reduced benefits with longer delays. The independence once framed as liberation begins revealing itself as exposure to unbuffered market forces and institutional indifference. The asymmetry becomes self reinforcing. One trajectory builds anti fragility through subtraction and compounding. The other accumulates fragility through addition of dependencies on shrinking resources. Neither side shows evidence of spontaneous convergence. The gap widens into a permanent feature of the social landscape. Census enumerators notice it in household composition data. Tax authorities feel it in declining per capita revenue from working age men. Retail analysts track it in shifting consumption baskets. Demographers project it in accelerating population pyramids inverted at the base. Urban planners see it in underutilized family-oriented infrastructure. Military planners worry about it in recruitment shortfalls. Central bankers adjust for it in consumption forecasts. The pattern embeds so deeply that it stops registering as anomaly and starts registering as baseline. Men who complete the arc arrive at a state best described as radical self-ownership. No external entity, government, employer, partner, family, friend, holds meaningful veto power over core decisions. Life organizes around internal directives executed with mechanical consistency. Peace is not an occasional visitor, but the default condition. Fulfillment arrives through mastery of selected domains rather than breadth of experience or volume of relationships. The world continues spinning, but the individual no longer needs to spin with it. Now the glue that holds society together has reached its most refined form when men begin treating every remaining societal obligation as a negotiable contract rather than an inherited duty. Civic participation gets audited with the same precision applied to personal finances. Voting continues in some cases, but only after calculating whether the marginal impact justifies the time cost of registration, polling station travel, and research into candidates who rarely align with core priorities of sovereignty and minimal interference. Jury duty summons trigger immediate requests for postponement or excusal on grounds of essential self-employment or hardship, backed by documentation that demonstrates genuine disruption to income streams. Community service requirements, when unavoidable, get fulfilled through the most efficient route possible, donating equivalent value to approved organizations rather than attending group sessions that demand emotional labor or small talk. Tax compliance remains absolute, but optimization reaches forensic levels. Every allowable deduction claimed, every credit maximized, every structure used to shift income into lower brackets or deferred accounts. The relationship with the state transforms from passive acceptance into calculated minimalism. Pay exactly what is legally required. Never a cent more through voluntary overwithholding or unclaimed refunds, and structure affairs to fall below thresholds that trigger additional scrutiny or reporting. Charitable giving undergoes the same scrutiny. Donations shift away from large institutional nonprofits toward direct, verifiable impact within trusted networks. $1,000 sent to a faceless organization with high overhead gets replaced by buying equipment for a younger man starting a trade apprenticeship, funding server costs for a private knowledge sharing forum, or covering legal fees for an ally facing baseless civil claims. The criterion stays simple. Does this contribution increase the overall resilience of the small, high trust circle? If not, the money stays invested or redeployed into personal anti-fragility. Public displays of virtue vanish entirely. No ribbon magnets on vehicles, no profile badges signaling causes, no social media virtue posts. Generosity exists, but only in forms that produce tangible returns in loyalty, knowledge, or reciprocal capability. Health optimization becomes a lifelong engineering project stripped of any performative element. Annual comprehensive blood work includes advanced panels that most primary care physicians never order. Full thyroid cascade with reverse T3, fasting insulin, and HbA1c, homocysteine, omega-3 index, vitamin D with parathyroid hormone, cross-check, HSCRP paired with fibrinogen, APOB over LDL, LPA, baseline established early. Results get logged in private spreadsheets with trend lines tracked over years. Interventions remain conservative and evidence driven. Berberine or metformin analogs. When fasting glucose creeps upward, low dose rapamycin protocols explored after age 40 under medical supervision for potential longevity signaling. NAD precursors cycled when energy dips correlate with age related decline markers. Sleep architecture gets treated as non negotiable infrastructure, tracked via wearable, optimized through strict light hygiene, temperature controlled mattress, zero alcohol within 8 hours of bedtime, magnesium 3 and 8 taken consistently. The body ceases to be something that happens to the individual and becomes a deliberately maintained asset whose performance directly influences every other domain of life. Cognitive maintenance follows parallel rigor. Dual end back training gets run 3 times weekly to preserve working memory capacity. Reading load stays heavy but curated. Primary sources over popular summaries, technical papers over journalism, books that demand active engagement over passive consumption. Writing practice continues as mental calisthenics, daily journaling of decisions and rationales, quarterly essays synthesizing observations into frameworks, occasional technical documentation for personal projects. Language acquisition persists as a meta skill builder. Immersion in a third or fourth tongue sharpens pattern recognition across domains while opening future geographic and economic doors. Memory techniques get drilled. Method of Loki for storing complex sequences, spaced repetition for retaining technical details, peg systems for rapid recall of numbers and dates. The mind sharpens into an instrument capable of sustained clarity under pressure because nothing external remains that can reliably cloud it. Creative outlets emerge in unexpected places once relational bandwidth disappears. Men who never considered themselves artistic begin producing work that serves internal purposes rather than audience capture. Woodworking projects turn utilitarian. Custom rifle racks, precision tool chests, modular storage systems that maximize small space efficiency. Music composition happens through digital audio workstations as a form of structured play, layering ambient tracks for focus sessions, building chiptune libraries for retro gaming nostalgia, experimenting with generative algorithms that produce endless variations without performance anxiety, writing branches into speculative fiction that explores parallel social architectures or technical treatises on self reliant systems. Photography becomes a discipline of deliberate capture, long exposure night shots of empty urban infrastructure, macro studies of mechanical components, time lapse documentation of personal projects from raw materials to finished product. None of this seeks external validation. The act of creation itself provides the reward loop through mastery and tangible output. Travel patterns evolve into strategic reconnaissance rather than leisure escapes. Trips get planned around multiple objectives, scouting potential relocation sites, building face to face relationships with international contacts, testing low infrastructure living for weeks at a time, acquiring skills unavailable locally, such as advanced diving certifications or off grid solar installation training. Itineraries stay lean, carry on only, multi city routing to maximize airline points, accommodations chosen for location and quiet over luxury. Cultural immersion occurs selectively, learning enough of the local language to navigate transactions and avoid tourist pricing, observing social dynamics without participation, noting which behaviors trigger institutional responses and which slide under radar. Return flights carry hard assets when advantageous, quality tools unavailable domestically, precious metals purchased at local premiums lower than Western markets, rare books, or components for ongoing projects. Each journey reinforces the core realization that no single place owns the future. Parenting, when it occurs at all, follows radically different logic from previous generations. The minority of men who choose fatherhood do so late, deliberately, and under tightly controlled conditions, legal paternity agreements specifying custody and financial terms before conception, co parenting frameworks that minimize ongoing entanglement, geographic distance built in from the start to preserve independence. Education of children emphasizes self reliance from early ages, financial literacy before adolescence, physical capability training, critical thinking drilled through debate, and logic puzzles. Exposure to multiple languages and cultures to prevent geographic or cultural lock in. Emotional support exists, but never substitutes for personal responsibility. Children learn early that external rescue remains limited and that internal locus of control determines outcomes. The goal shifts from creating dependence to producing capable, sovereign individuals who will not need perpetual provision. Risk landscapes get mapped with cartographic precision. Geopolitical flashpoints monitored through primary sources and signal intelligence from trusted networks rather than mainstream headlines. Economic cycle positioning adjusted quarterly. Defensive when indicators flash contraction, aggressive when mispricings appear. Personal security layered beyond visible measures. Hardened entry points on residences. Redundant communication channels. Contingency caches in multiple jurisdictions. Medical evacuation insurance kept current. Digital footprint minimized to near invisibility outside necessary professional presence. Pseudonymous handles for public facing activity. Zero personal photos shared publicly. Metadata scrubbed from uploads. VPN chains routed through privacy friendly jurisdictions. The operating posture becomes proactive avoidance of high probability downside scenarios rather than reactive mitigation after damage occurs. Time perception changes fundamentally. Years stop feeling scarce when obligations no longer compound exponentially through relational multipliers. A decade stretches into expansive territory filled with deliberate projects rather than frantic catching up. Aging ceases to carry dread because physical and cognitive decline get attacked preemptively and systematically. Death itself gets reframed not as tragedy, but as final accounting. Assets positioned for efficient transfer or dissolution. Knowledge archived for potential retrieval. Loose ends tied years in advance. The horizon lengthens because the individual no longer borrows against future vitality to service present demands. Women moving through the same time frame face compounding structural compression. Career ceilings lower when sponsorship networks evaporate. Wage stagnation hits harder in sectors already saturated and underpaid relative to productivity. Housing affordability deteriorates as single income women compete against dual earner holdouts and institutional investors. Social capital erodes faster when friendship maintenance requires disproportionate emotional labor without reciprocal investment. Reproductive timelines tighten under pressure from biological clocks and contracting partner pools. State systems deliver diminishing returns as funding bases shrink and bureaucratic friction increases. The promised autonomy reveals itself as exposure to unbuffered volatility across every domain. The two arcs continue pulling apart at rates that make convergence mathematically implausible without exogenous shocks of unprecedented scale. One path builds compounding sovereignty through relentless subtraction of dependencies. The other contends with accelerating fragility as support structures retract. Observation alone suffices to map the divergence. Intervention appears neither desired nor feasible from either direction. The changes solidifies into a form of operational elegance where every system the individual still touches gets reverse engineered for maximum extraction of value with minimum exposure. Utility bills become case studies in arbitrage, comparing providers quarterly, switching when promotional rates expire, installing smart meters that allow real-time monitoring and automated shutoff of non-essential circuits during peak pricing windows, harvesting rainwater for non-potable uses in jurisdictions that permit it, running small-scale solar experiments on balconies or rooftops, even in urban high-rises to offset daytime loads. Internet service gets treated as critical infrastructure, yet negotiated like any commodity, bundling only what delivers measurable throughput improvement, using cellular failover as primary backup, routing through privacy-focused DNS and encrypted tunnels by default. Phone plans drop to bare minimum data allotments, supplemented by Wi-Fi calling and public hotspots mapped in advance for travel. The guiding rule remains unchanged. Pay the least possible while retaining full functionality. Never subsidize corporate overhead through inertia or loyalty. Asset protection evolves from basic diversification into layered fortress architecture. Primary residence, if owned, gets titled through irrevocable trusts or LLCs domiciled in asset friendly states or offshore vehicles with strong privacy statutes. Liquid investments spread across multiple custodians to eliminate single point failure. Brokerage accounts at different institutions. Crypto held in cold storage across geographically distributed hardware wallets, precious metals stored in private vaults rather than home safes. Insurance policies get stripped to catastrophic coverage only. High deductible health plans paired with health savings accounts that function as stealth retirement vehicles. Umbrella liability policies kept at multi-million dollar levels to deter frivolous suits. No ancillary riders that inflate premiums for low probability events. Estate documents refresh annually. Revocable living trusts updated to reflect current holdings. Pour over wills as safety net. Healthcare directives that explicitly refuse heroic measures beyond a defined threshold. Powers of attorney granted only to individuals vetted through years of demonstrated reliability. The structure ensures that even total loss in one domain leaves the core intact. Information diet becomes almost monastic in its selectivity. Primary intake channels narrow to a handful of high signal sources. Raw economic data releases from central banks and statistical agencies, unfiltered court filings and legislative texts for legal climate monitoring, technical white papers and source code repositories for emerging technology trends, encrypted group chats where trusted men share field verified intelligence on jurisdictional shifts, supply chain disruptions, or enforcement patterns. Secondary sources get sampled only when primary indicators flash anomalies. Mainstream outlets receive zero habitual attention. Their framing gets treated as noise until independently corroborated. Knowledge compounds through synthesis rather than accumulation, connecting dots between seemingly disparate domains. How changes in international remittance regulations affect crypto adoption rates in certain corridors. How labor force participation data correlates with housing permit issuances in secondary cities. How biometric surveillance rollouts in one country predict policy creep in allied nations. The mind trains itself to operate on probabilistic models rather than narratives. Physical security posture adjusts to match threat model without descending into paranoia. Concealed carry permits maintained where statistically justified by violent crime rates and legal climate, with regular qualification shoots to keep proficiency sharp. Home hardening remains subtle but effective. Reinforced door frames, high lumen motion lights on timers, security cameras feeding to local storage rather than cloud services, window film that obscures interior views while allowing outward visibility. Urban movement patterns get randomized within reason, varying commute routes and times, avoiding predictable routines that could enable stalking or opportunistic crime. Personal defense tools stay layered, edged weapons for close quarters, Impact tools for intermediate range. Firearms only when training currency and legal carry a line. The principle is deterrence through visible capability and invisibility through unpredictability. Never advertise preparedness. Never appear as an easy mark. Nutrition timing refines further into performance pharmacology without pharmaceuticals. Intermittent fasting windows stabilize at 18 to 24 hours most days, with feeding periods compressed to optimize insulin sensitivity and autophagy markers. Protein intake targets 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of lean body mass, timed around training sessions for maximum muscle protein synthesis. Carbohydrate cycling aligns with activity, higher on heavy lifting days to replenish glycogen, near zero on rest, or light cardio days to maintain ketosis benefits without chronic restriction. Micronutrient density gets prioritized over calorie volume. Organ meats rotated weekly for bioavailable vitamins, fermented foods for gut microbiome support, seaweed and shellfish for iodine and selenium, bone broth or collagen peptides for joint integrity. Blood glucose stays flatlined through continuous monitoring when experimenting with new protocols, with adjustments made within 24 hours of deviation. The result is sustained energy devoid of post meal crashes, mental acuity that peaks rather than ebbs, and recovery rates that allow training frequency once considered excessive. Training itself matures into periodized longevity programming. Annual macrocycles divide into strength blocks, emphasizing progressive overload on big compounds, hypertrophy phases for joint stability and metabolic health, power development cycles with Olympic lift variations scaled to age and injury history, deload and active recovery microcycles every 8 to 12 weeks. Accessory work targets weak links identified through movement screening, thoracic extension drills for desk-bound posture correction, hip mobility sequences to preserve sprint mechanics into later decades, grip training to maintain functional independence, metrics tracked obsessively, velocity-based training for bar speed, force plate jumps for power output, grip dynamometer readings for neuromuscular health proxies. Injury prevention becomes proactive. Prehab routines run daily. Soft tissue work scheduled like appointments. Blood flow restriction used sparingly for joint sparing volume. The body no longer trains for aesthetics or competition, but for decades of unassisted living, carrying loads, climbing stairs, rising from the floor without assistance, maintaining balance under perturbation. Skill acquisition enters mastery loops rather than novelty chasing. Once foundational competencies reach proficiency, coding in multiple paradigms, foreign language conversational fluency, advanced financial modeling, physical trades like welding or electrical diagnostics, focus narrows to depth over breadth. A single language might get refined to near native reading and technical comprehension over years rather than superficial command of 5 tongues. Programming domain, say systems level Rust or smart contract auditing, gets pursued until the individual can contribute meaningfully to open source projects or identify 0 days in production code. Trade skills advance from hobbyist to professional grade, building custom machinery from raw stock, diagnosing and repairing complex electronics, constructing off-grid power systems that run for months unattended. Each pursuit follows the same arc: deliberate practice with immediate feedback, spaced repetition of core principles, teaching others to solidify understanding, eventual creation of novel applications. The reward is not external recognition, but the ability to solve real problems independently when systems fail. Financial engineering reaches Baroque levels of sophistication. Income streams diversify into uncorrelated buckets. Active consulting retained at premium rates for limited hours. Passive dividend portfolios rebalanced quarterly. Real estate cash flow properties managed remotely through vetted operators. Algorithmic trading bots running on private servers with kill switches. Digital asset staking and yield farming in audited protocols. Royalty streams from intellectual property licensed under restrictive terms. Tax drag gets minimized through geographic residency planning, spending just enough days in low tax jurisdictions to qualify while maintaining legal domicile elsewhere, structuring entities to defer recognition of gains, harvesting losses systematically, utilizing opportunity zone reinvestments where rules still favor long holds. Net worth tracking updates daily via custom dashboards, pulling API data from every account, with forward projections stress tested against historical drawdowns, inflation scenarios, and black swan events. The objective is not retirement in the conventional sense, but perpetual optionality, freedom to walk away from any income source without lifestyle compression. Social architecture stabilizes into minimal viable network. Core group remains small, 3 to 7 men who have proven alignment over years through shared adversity or high stakes collaboration. Interaction frequency drops to what sustains trust without creating obligation. Monthly voice calls or in person meets when geography allows, focused on updates that matter, new jurisdictional intel, tested gear, validated strategies. No birthdays, no holidays, no obligatory check ins. Loyalty manifests in action, covering for each other during travel, pooling resources for legal defense if needed, sharing windfalls that benefit the collective. Peripheral contacts get maintained transactionally. Experts consulted for one off needs, then released until next utility arises. The network functions like a distributed ledger of competence. Each node contributes unique value. Redundancy exists without duplication. Consensus forms rapidly when decisions impact the group. Long term horizon thinking becomes almost geological in timescale. Decisions evaluate impact across 20, 30, 50-year windows. A property purchase weighs not just cash flow today, but climate risk exposure in 2070, regulatory creep in 2045, succession planning in 2060. Health interventions target not current biomarkers, but projected frailty curves decades out. Knowledge investments aim at compounding that outlives the individual. Open source contributions that persist. Mentorship chains that propagate capability. Documentation that survives institutional decay. Legacy ceases to be sentimental and becomes infrastructural, building redundancies so thoroughly that personal absence changes nothing for those who inherit the systems. Women continue experiencing the opposite vector. Professional autonomy erodes under market saturation and reduced sponsorship. Relational optionality narrows as desirable partners consolidate into non-committal archetypes or vanish entirely. Financial resilience weakens when consumer patterns meet stagnant real wages and rising fixed costs. Social scaffolding frays without reciprocal investment from peers or institutions. Biological timelines press harder against contracting opportunity sets. State mechanisms deliver less as contributor bases shrink, and administrative bloat grows. The once celebrated independence reveals its brittleness when tested against sustained absence of traditional buffers. The trajectories lock into permanent separation. One builds exponential sovereignty through disciplined reduction. The other navigates increasing constraint through expanding reliance on contracting systems. No bridge appears between them. The divergence itself becomes the defining social fact of the era. Interactions with legacy institutions become purely extractive exercises conducted with surgical detachment. Government agencies receive precisely formatted filings on exact deadlines, never early enough to invite additional scrutiny nor late enough to trigger penalties. Benefits once claimed out of habit get discontinued when calculations show net negative value after administrative overhead and opportunity cost. Public services get used only when alternatives prove inferior. Libraries for rare physical texts unavailable digitally, municipal pools during off hours for low cost conditioning when home setups cannot replicate Olympic grade depth. Every encounter follows the same protocol. State requirements met to the letter, no voluntary disclosure beyond mandated fields, immediate disengagement upon completion. The relationship resembles that of a ghost tenant in a crumbling apartment building, paying rent just low enough to avoid eviction, never renovating, never socializing with neighbors, ready to vacate the moment better shelter appears elsewhere. Corporate employment, for those who still engage it, transforms into high leverage arbitrage. Contracts get negotiated to cap hours at 30 or fewer per week while preserving full salary through demonstrated outsized productivity during compressed windows. Remote clauses become non negotiable. Office attendance gets treated as breach unless compensated at premium rates. Performance reviews focus exclusively on quantifiable outputs submitted in bullet point format with supporting data. No self promotion narratives, no team spirit anecdotes. When promotions arrive, they get accepted only if accompanied by immediate equity grants or deferred compensation that vests faster than standard schedules. Exit strategies stay perpetually primed. Updated resume maintained in encrypted vault, active recruiter relationships kept warm through quarterly touchpoints, side income streams scaled to cover burn rate within 90 days of termination notice. The job ceases to be identity and becomes a temporary cash flow engine optimized for maximum extraction before inevitable obsolescence. Entrepreneurial ventures follow parallel logic, but with even tighter control surfaces. Businesses launch as lean single member LLCs or S Corp with virtual addresses and low liability jurisdictions, minimal fixed overhead, and revenue models that scale without proportional headcount. Service offerings target pain points in high margin niches, fractional CFO work for crypto funds, smart contract security audits for DeFi protocols, custom automation scripts for small manufacturers facing labor shortages. Client vetting remains stringent, payment terms front loaded, scope creep clauses with automatic termination triggers, NDAs that protect the provider far more aggressively than the buyer. When projects conclude cleanly, the relationship ends permanently unless recurring value exceeds acquisition cost. Profits get reinvested immediately into appreciating assets rather than lifestyle inflation. Additional cold storage crypto wallets, precious metal allocations, or fractional ownership in income producing real estate in politically stable secondary markets. The enterprise exists to fund sovereignty, never to become another master. Digital presence shrinks to near invisibility outside narrow utility channels. Professional profiles on legacy platforms get frozen at minimal viable completeness. Headline stating exact expertise, bullet point achievements with verifiable metrics, no personal photos, no activity since last job change. Social accounts either delete entirely or convert to lurker status with zero post, following only high signal accounts that never reciprocate engagement. Content creation, when it occurs, happens pseudonymously on decentralized platforms where attribution cannot be traced back to legal identity. Technical write ups posted to pseudonymous GitHub repositories, market analyses shared in encrypted Telegram channels, philosophical fragments dropped anonymously on niche forums. The objective is contribution without exposure. knowledge disseminated to benefit the competent minority while preserving zero attack surface for doxing, cancellation, or legal discovery. Physical footprint minimizes to the point of near nomadism even when stationary. Possessions fit inside a single vehicle plus one storage unit kept in a low cost region. Clothing rotates through 7-day modular kits, merino base layers, quick dry synthetics, one set of formal wear for rare high stakes meetings. Electronics consolidate to laptop, phone, noise canceling headphones, and a compact power station for off grid capability. Documents exist in triplicate, encrypted cloud, hardware security keys in separate geographic locations, physical copies in fireproof safe deposit boxes across jurisdictions. The living arrangement stays deliberately temporary. Month to month leases in furnished corporate apartments, short term Airbnb bookings in quiet neighborhoods, occasional house sitting arrangements through trusted networks that provide free shelter in exchange for property oversight. Mobility becomes default. Roots get treated as liability rather than asset. Daily rhythm achieves near mechanical consistency without rigidity. Wake time locks at the same minute, regardless of time zone, through gradual light exposure protocols and consistent melatonin timing. Morning sequence executes in fixed order, hydration with electrolytes, 10-minute mobility flow, black coffee during first cognitive block, primary deep work session until natural focus drop off. Midday break includes 20-minute walk in low traffic areas for vitamin D synthesis and mental reset. Afternoon block handles lighter tasks, email triage, financial reconciliation, skill practice reps. Evening winds down through deliberate dimming. Blue light blockers 2 hours before sleep. Red spectrum lighting, reading physical books on Stoic themes or technical manuals. Sleep onset averages under 15 minutes. Total duration stabilizes at 7.5 to 8 hours with minimal interruption. The schedule serves the organism rather than external demands, creating compounding returns in energy, focus, and resilience. Emotional landscape flattens into stable equanimity. Positive affect arises from internal mastery, completing a complex audit trail, hitting new personal records in compound lifts, watching portfolio value compound through disciplined allocation. Negative affect shrinks because trigger conditions disappear. No relational conflict, no institutional betrayal, no social performance anxiety. When irritation surfaces, it manifests as brief physiological signal, elevated heart rate, muscle tension, then gets dissipated through immediate corrective action, cold shower, heavy breathing protocol, or single heavy set to failure. Joy emerges quietly from alignment between intention and outcome rather than external validation. Contentment settles as default background state, interrupted only by deliberate challenges chosen for growth rather than avoidance of boredom. Future planning operates on branching, probabilistic trees rather than linear narratives. Scenarios get modeled quarterly. Baseline continuation of current trajectory, moderate geopolitical deterioration, triggering accelerated relocation, severe economic contraction requiring full off grid pivot, black swan technological displacement necessitating rapid skill migration. Each branch receives pre allocated resources, emergency passport copies, portable solar kits, language immersion audio libraries, seed capital in bearer form assets, contingency drills run biannually, 48-hour simulated power outage, 72-hour communication blackout, sudden jurisdiction change requiring 24-hour departure. The exercise is not preparation for apocalypse, but insurance against entropy. Systems built to withstand moderate shocks rarely fail under mild pressure. Intergenerational transmission, when it occurs, follows asymmetric patterns. Sons, if raised within this framework, absorb sovereignty as baseline assumption rather than reaction. Daughters encounter the model through observation rather than direct instruction, witnessing disciplined minimalism, financial independence, emotional self regulation, then adapt elements selectively to their own circumstances. The legacy imparted is not doctrine, but toolkit. How to calculate total cost of ownership, how to recognize extractive dynamics early, how to exit entanglements before they compound, how to build anti-fragile personal infrastructure. No pressure applies to follow the exact path. The gift is awareness that alternatives exist beyond default scripts. Women traversing the opposing vector face escalating convergence towards systemic fragility. Professional domains saturate with competition from automated tools and offshore labor pools, while sponsorship networks remain vestigial. Social capital depletes faster as reciprocal investment from men vanishes and female peer groups fragment under economic stress. Relational markets harden into hypergamous bottlenecks where viable long term options shrink annually. Reproductive decisions compress against biological deadlines and contracting partner reliability. Financial buffers erode when discretionary spending habits meet stagnant, real purchasing power and rising essential costs. Institutional support delivers diminishing marginal returns as contributor bases, contract, and administrative overhead balloons. The once promised liberation solidifies into exposure to unbuffered market discipline, institutional neglect, and demographic momentum working against individual agency. The two realities coexist within the same geographic and temporal space, yet inhabit parallel dimensions. One advances through exponential subtraction of friction and compounding of internal capability. The other navigates accelerating constraint through increasing dependence on contracting external structures. No mechanism of spontaneous reconciliation presents itself. The separation embeds as structural fact rather than passing phase, visible in empty family pews, shuttered date night venues, inverted population pyramids, declining male labor force participation, shrinking tax bases, collapsing mixed gender social venues, accelerating male overseas relocation, and countless other indicators that accumulate into undeniable pattern. Men who complete this arc inhabit a state best described as sovereign minimalism. External participation reduces to tactical necessity rather than existential requirement. Fulfillment derives from alignment between internal directive and executed outcome rather than relational mirroring or institutional approval. Peace manifests as the sustained absence of previously normalized tension. Life organizes around chosen difficulty rather than imposed obligation. The world persists in its complexity, yet the individual navigates it with radical economy of motion, engaging only what serves sovereignty, discarding the rest without apology. This is the endpoint of the long withdrawal. Not destruction of society, but withdrawal from its extractive layers. Not conquest, but disengagement. Not revenge, but consequence. Men walked away because staying no longer computed. They built lives that no longer require female participation, institutional goodwill, or societal validation. The systems designed around mutual provision now operate with one party absent, revealing their inherent imbalances in real time. The future unfolds around this absence, one quiet decision at a time, one closed door after another, one reclaimed hour compounding into reclaimed decades. To those who have stayed through this entire exploration of these realities, the 1 hour gang who made it to the very end, you have real dedication, and I respect that more than you know. If these angry guy breakdowns hit the mark for you, and you want more of this direct, unfiltered perspective, You can show support by grabbing me a Red Bull through the link in the description. What did you think about the full picture laid out here? Do you agree with where things are heading, or do you see a different angle entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let the conversation keep going. Like the video if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video, and just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.